This video was recorded in November 19, 2019 with the permission of the interviewee, at the Mifflin County Library, Lewistown, Pennsylvania, for inclusion in the Veterans History Project.
There we go. This is Molly Kinney. I'm the director of the Mifflin County Library.
And I'm Pauline Belfiore. I'm a clerk in the library.
And today we're here to interview, ta-da.
My name is Steve Ferranti, S-T-E-P-H-E-N.
Okay. So, you've told us that you are not a native of Juniata County. Where were you born?
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I don't know the hospital because I was told the name, but I think it's a parking lot now, so.
All right. And you have a lot of siblings, don't you?
I do. Not all alive, but I am the oldest of 10.
Okay. So in relationship to that, were any of your other siblings in the military? Other family?
Yes, I had 2 younger brothers. Both were in during the Vietnam War time. Neither went to Vietnam, though.
Okay. Grandparents? Parents?
No, my parents, my mother and father. Well, my father was at the age where World War II started. He was at the age, he was like 32 years old. So they had to look at him and say, no, maybe not. But he did work at the Naval Shipyard.
Okay.
And a little reflection on that. He worked at the Naval Shipyard building those Liberty ships for World War II. And he was a pipe fitter. And what did they put on pipes? Asbestos. Strike number 1 for him. This is all a reflection. Strike number 2, after the war, he became a stonemason. Had his own business. He built our own house. He breathed stone dust. Strike number 2. Strike number 3, like most people of his age at that time, heavy smoker. So he didn't see me graduate high school. He never saw my families, my kids, my grandkids. And so I kind of, think back on that a little bit. Mom did see most of my grandchildren before she passed on. She was just a housewife, though. Never learned to drive a car. When Dad passed, the kids that were home took care of that. So, she didn't want to drive a car.
Okay. Go ahead.
What were your parents' or your siblings' feelings when you joined the service?
Well, the kids were too young to really know much about what was going on. When I left for the service, there were 18 years between the youngest and myself. So and my dad died right before I graduated high school. Mom, it was one of these situations where I didn't really know something until about 2 years ago. And I didn't think about it. When I enlisted, and there's more story to that, but when I enlisted, and then I went home and told Mom that I enlisted, but only after she received a letter in the mail with plane tickets to go to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. And then I gave her the full story. I said, Mom, you got your hands full, just don't worry about it. Well, it was at the height of the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. She was going to worry about it. But at 19, I didn't think much about it. It wasn't until 2 years ago when my sister told me, she said, yeah, Mom told me about you, because she didn't remember either. Mom told me that you did that you left. And when you left, that was the day she cried. So there's your answer. I didn't know that until 2 years ago.
Okay.
Now I think about that, so.
Did you, you were 19, so did you go straight from high school?
No. When I graduated high school, I had no direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to college. We had no money. But then I was like everyone else. We just didn't have the money to do that. Big family, no parent, one parent, not going to happen. So I found this technical school in Philadelphia that had a laboratory assistant, medical laboratory assistant. I didn't know what that was. I knew it was in the medical field. And I said, it's got to be better, it's got to give me some direction. So I worked in pretty much in a pharmacy, which got me sort of interested in that sort of thing, to pay my way through school. That was only a year. And after I got out of that school, I started working at a local hospital for $2.25 an hour in the laboratory. I thought I was hot. I thought, oh man, this is really cool. 3 months later, I got a letter. And that letter said, report here in Newark, New Jersey for a physical. I knew what that was. But that's what I did. I did work for, I went to school for, it was like a 12-month school, and then worked for 2 or 3 months, and that was it. Then I went in. However, it did help, but I didn't know that at the time.
Okay. So you got airplane tickets. So your basic was at Fort Travis?
No. When I got that letter about reporting for my draft physical, because the draft was on at that time, I had known that I was going to be drafted. It was just, when you get your physical, that's the first step. You pass the physical, you're drafted. And when I went to Newark, New Jersey, I'm standing in line 2 abreast, and we're told to shut up, face forward, and don't move until we tell you to move. Okay. So we did. Went through the physical. As I'm coming out of the physical area where we did that cursory physical, I look off to one side of the building. This is a giant processing building for the military at that time. There were thousands of people in this building. And it was like a city block in size, as I recall. I look and I see this guy in a white uniform giving shots to guys. Okay. I come back out of the physical. He's sitting down smoking a cigarette. So I walk over to him. I'm by myself now. I don't know any of these people. I said, are you in the military? And he said, see, I didn't even know what the military was. He said, yeah, I'm in the Army. And I said, how do I get to do what you're doing? I didn't know what he did. I just knew he had a white uniform and he was giving shots. Therefore, it was medical, right? He made that assumption. He said, what are you here for? I said, my draft physical. He said, well, you got 2 options. Actually, I had 3 options, but he didn't tell me the 3rd option. He said, you can wait and get drafted, and they'll train you for whatever they want in the Army and send you wherever they want in the Army. Or 2, you can enlist in a military service other than the Army, or even in the Army, and they're still going to send you where they want to go, but they'll train you and do that sort of thing. And it wasn't until after I heard that, I said, well, wait a minute, I have another option. I don't have to go at all. He said, oh, yes, you do, or you'll face prosecution to that effect. And I said, oh, that's right, because I'm not leaving the country. I did hear about those people that left the country, and I wasn't going to leave the country. So he says, and I remember him, I can't remember his face, I remember that uniform, and I remember him putting his hand on my shoulder and pointing down the end of a hallway that I couldn't see the end of. He said, go down there, there's some recruiters down there, pick one, okay, and enlist. He said, chances are that you will not have to be carrying a rifle. Well, what did that leave? The Marines? No, I don't think I was fit enough for the Marines, and I'll tell you why in a moment. That only left the Coast Guard, the Air Force, and really that was it for me. Navy, I can't swim, so I wasn't going about to do that one. So I went down to the end of the hallway and I found the Air Force recruiter, and I just made a left-hand turn and went in and pleaded guilty. I said, what can I do? And that pretty much was what happened. They wanted me to, well, They asked me what education did I have. I said, did you have a minimum high school education? I said I did. Anything else? And I said about this training for the laboratory. He said, okay, probably not going to have any weight on where we send you, what we train you on. But he said, it's 4 years with a 2-year inactive. So it's a 6-year commitment. And I said, okay. And he said, and you know there's a war going on? And I said, yeah. How do you feel about the war? And I remember saying something like, I don't feel anything about the war. I really didn't, because I was totally apolitical about what was going on. It wasn't until after I got in that I saw and changed things. And that's what happened. I enlisted at that point. And then I went home and told Mom that I went enlisted, but she didn't know much about anything other than that. And then I got the tickets, and then she really knew, and it sunk, apparently hit home, and I didn't know that.
Okay. So why didn't you think you were fit enough for the Marines?
Oh, okay, good point. As we're standing in line for that physical, 2 abreast, your hands are at your side, you're told to face forward and shut up. And I'm glancing off like this, off to the side, and there was this guy in a Smokey the Bear hat and uniforms with striped, crisp uniform, really creased, with his hands behind his back. And as he's walking by, I'm on the outside row, there's another row here. He's looking at the guys standing in line. Now we're in civilian clothes. And as he approaches me, he glances over, I remember this, and then he just went forward again. Okay, I didn't think anything of it. I thought that's part of what you had to do. The second guy in front of me, though, there was a long line, tapped him on the shoulder and went like this. So he moved out of the line. And he kept going down the line. He did the same thing, tapping people on the shoulder. And he went back the other side of the line, did the same thing. Don't let anybody tell you, at that time, the Marines were drafting, not the Army. Those guys were based on their physical fitness as they looked. And they were becoming Marines. And since I was kind of a dumpy guy, they went past me. I said, that's cool. But I didn't know that at the time. And like I said, the Navy, I thought about the Navy, but they didn't have an opening. Air Force did. And that's how I got in. And he told me that. He said, you're lucky because I have a quota, and you just made the quota.
Okay. So basic training, tell us about it.
There isn't much to tell other than, boy, did they yell at me. To this day, I'm wearing hearing aids from all that. No, just kidding, just kidding. It was a unique experience in that we were all treated the same. It didn't matter what you looked like, who you were, who you said you were there, you're gonna learn what we want you to learn, and you're gonna do it on our terms. Give you an example. And I remember this because I really couldn't understand it. He said, we are going to feed you, we are going to clothe you, we are going to work you, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, they're going to break me down. But I didn't look at it at that time. This was only afterwards. Break you down, build you back up, okay? Get your preparation for war. That was his words, getting you ready for war. It wasn't because there was a war going on, it's just what basic training did, okay? You had to qualify with weapons, and you had to march. Although I don't know what that has to do with war, but it had to do with discipline. It had to do with teamwork. I didn't know those things, that those concepts were not, they were just not in my vocabulary. But that's what they did. But I remember this, after the first week, there was 2 instances that I do remember. One was, we were in this old World War II barracks. There are none of those barracks. I think there's only one left down at Lackland. And that's where basic training was Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Still is today. They have one down there as a museum piece, I understand. I haven't seen it. I've seen pictures of it. That's where I had my basic training. There were 25 of us in the second floor, 25 of us at the bottom floor. Very rarely did we meet each other because we all went out at the same time. We all went to the chow hall, and then we went with different instructors. And the thing that sort of came to mind at the time, and I thought, this is really strange. He said, we're going to take you guys to Chow Hall, and you're going to have your meal. This was about a week after I'm in, and I'm still trying to figure out this guy that was in my flight. We called them flights at that time, upstairs. I could not understand this guy. It was one of our basic trainee, but he spoke a language I couldn't understand. And for the first week, I didn't even know his name. To this day, I can't remember what his name is. Afterwards, I said, why does this guy talk? Is he a foreign student or something, or a foreign trainee? No, he was from Louisiana. He was a Cajun. I remember somebody saying that, and I remember saying, where the hell is Louisiana? Because I was from New Jersey and didn't have that. And the second thing was, one of the instructors, there were two of them. They were loud. They were not truly vulgar like you see them sometimes depicted, as I recall, although that did happen a lot, especially in some of the other services. Part of that breakdown, build-up process. I remember him telling us when we went to the Chow Hall the first time, we will be drilling, we will be marching, we will be doing all these other things. And you will be fed properly. But and what you take, you will eat. But if you puke on my parade ground, you're going to clean it up. So in other words, what they were saying is, go in, eat what you think you needed, and then proceed. There were people who would overeat because they really worked you hard. I remember that. I went in at over 200 pounds, and I left basic training 6 weeks later at under 200 pounds. So, yeah, it did work, and I did eat. But it was my introduction to the world of teamwork, those concepts that I didn't have before, breaking you down. When I first got off the airplane, I don't remember that. I do remember getting on a bus, and I do remember it being daylight. And the bus was there waiting for recruits from various areas to take us to Lackland. What I didn't know where we were. I just knew we got an airplane landed, and I got off an airplane. I had one little bag. That was all I carried. We got on that bus, and we're driving on that bus for at least several hours. I can't remember the exact number, but it was dark. It was really dark when we got there. What I learned years later was that was intentional. If you landed there during the day, they drove around in circles to get you in late at night so that you're beat down, okay? And then you get off the bus, it's at night. It was all part of that processing that they did. And they did it intentionally. Put your bag down, you did. Pick your bag up, and you did. Put it back down, and you did. We did that for 15 minutes, I remember, something like that. Finally, we get in and get squared away. The alarm clock that they used was a trash can lid and a trash can, empty trash can. And he would bang that lid and throw that trash can down there, and you got up, and that started your day. That lasted about 6 weeks or so. And then I got my first stripe, my first ribbon, and then my first assignment. Because of that training that I had, they accepted that. And they gave, which means I didn't have to go to a medical training school. Instead, they sent me right to my first assignment, which was a military hospital in California. And there, I was what they called an OJT, on-the-job training. But I also had to take a written, thorough, specific test on laboratory medicine for a skill level. If I didn't pass that skill level, I would have gone to a training course at that point. But like I said, at that time I was focused on career as well.
Okay. And how long were you there in California?
Well, that's a unique situation too, because it didn't happen very often with people. I was at Travis Air Force Base in California for 1 year. From there, I was shipped to Central America, Panama, the Canal Zone. From there, they asked me, before I left Panama, they asked me where I would like to go. Well, I didn't know where I wanted to go. I just said, how about that hospital I was in California? They did. So I went back. So I've only been outside of Lackland for the military training, I went to Travis Air Force Base, which is outside of Sacramento, California, and then Panama, and then back to California. That was my introduction to war and war wounded. The hospital, it was always a training, it was always a staging area for wounded coming back from Vietnam. But my first trip there, I was left in the laboratory, so I was just doing testing. I wasn't seeing patients. When I left Panama, promoted to a staff sergeant. That means I came back to the States, to this hospital, and I think that was really one of the reasons why I came back. They sent me back. Because as soon as I got back to Travis in California, second time, they made me a supervisor on the ward, where I was responsible for 20 or 30 patients at a time, taking blood samples, doing the testing when needed. And that's where I had to learn new skills, because the war wounded, well, I can sit down and probably today take blood from your arm. That's not a problem. I could take blood from the heel of a baby. I used to do that. That's not a problem. What if you don't have an arm? What if you don't have a heel? Okay. What if you have areas of the body that you had to learn where to get blood from, and you had to be taught by physicians because no one else could do it? They were busy. We didn't have enough people. And I got to thinking about that years later, and I don't remember faces. I don't remember insignias, because they were wearing white gowns, so nobody had rank as far as I was concerned, and except if you looked at their chart, which I never didn't have to. I do remember wounds, and I do remember, in particular, thinking the wounds that I saw were horrific. I was 23 years old at that time, and I'm thinking to myself, that could have been me. Really could have. And that's when it hit home. And when I saw that, and I said, you know, I just had to wall it off. They were patients. That's what I did. That's how I worked with it. They were patients. Treated everybody the same. If you were there as a patient, you were a patient. That's how, with the respect and dignity that you required. But I also had to learn new skills. And those skills were not something you would learn as a civilian, because that's not part of what that job required. That was because of manpower. I mean, if you're not busy, we need you to offload some planes. Okay, where do I do that? And they took us out to the flight line, and a flight would come in from Subic Bay, which was in the Philippines, with wounded. Not all ambulatory wounded. These were wounded in stretchers. So we would go out and be stretcher bearers to bring them in. You did that too. If there was a need for transportation, you would drive a vehicle to and from. I had to learn how to do that. Yes, I had to learn how to drive an ambulance. But that wasn't necessarily part. It's what they tell you have to do when the situation is required. But that opened my eyes when I saw that wounded, all those wounded. And it was a daily basis for 14 months that I dealt with that. But so did everyone else. I was not alone there. So, but I still think about that though once in a while, because did it affect me at the time? No, it did not affect me, because I walled it off. Did it affect me afterwards, after I left the service? No, because I had other activities, and I had a life, I had a family, I had a career. It wasn't until I retired I started reflecting on some of that stuff, making contact. Interesting story with Hutch, Denny, but that's not for this section here, but that's
Are you sure it's not? Do you
Well-
want to tell us?
Well, when I got out of the service in 1970, I had focused on a career, and intercepted by a woman who, you know, I later married, or she married me, I'm not sure which on that, who I'm still married today. But because of that that change and family and kids, my focus was no longer on my military career. That was gone. That was a chapter in my life that I put away. So I didn't think about it, at least not consciously. And it wasn't until I retired, X number of years later, notice how I got around that, that I did. And with Dennis, I didn't know Dennis before. I've only known Dennis maybe 3 years, maybe going on 4 years, because he was in this council that I. But before that, I said, I'm just going to find out if there's anybody in this county. I happened to see a picture on the internet, paging through the internet for Juniata County, and I saw him in fatigues walking a dog, and there was a little blurb about his name. I don't know Dennis. Well, I don't have a phone book because phone books are no longer used. But I did do a search, found out his phone number, and I called him. And I remember him answering the phone. Are you Dennis? Yeah. Who's calling? And I introduced myself. And he said, I don't think I know you. I said, you don't know me. And then we proceeded to talk. Now we're good friends. Why did I do that? I don't know. I don't know why I did that. But I was starting to say, you know what, maybe there's more important things now that I can do. And now I'm involved with other things veteran related, and I'm glad I did. He was a start of it.
How about any particularly humorous or unusual events during your...
Like, what did you do when you were off duty? Anything associated with, because I'm imagining that's when, do you think that's when you had
Downtime, if you're looking
Downtime.
like
Yeah.
downtime
Yeah.
type thing. Yes, but when you say humorous, it could have been downtime, or it could have been even a while on duty.
It's okay.
Okay. I remember once, vaguely, the government has procurement procedures and protocols. They still do today. And they also have budgets. And they're given money according to their budget. And if they don't spend that budget, their budget gets decreased. Sound familiar? Well, it was then. Because I was an NCO, that's a non-commissioned officer rank, as an enlisted man. I wasn't an officer. I got called into the chief NCO office as part of a meeting, and I remember this vaguely, but I remember it struck me as really strange. They said, we have a budget meeting coming up. We are coming up on our yearly renewal of budgets. We have money we have to spend, and we have to spend it. And I remember someone asking, why do you have to spend it? Just give it back to them, or add it to whatever you get. That's not the way it works, son. Something to that effect. So, what do? Well, we need more supplies. What kind of supplies? Well, we need gauze, we need vacutainers, which were the blood tubes that you collected the blood in, needles, tourniquets, and things like that. So we all came up with lists of what we thought might be necessary. The budget gets passed. It wasn't until several months later that I found out that because they couldn't get enough needles and tubes and things like that, they spent the money elsewhere. They spent it on toilet paper. And they had a truckload of toilet paper in a warehouse, strictly for the laboratory. Well, you're not going to go through that much toilet paper in your lifetime. But that's what they did. And I thought, now that was funny. Expensive, but it was funny. But that's how they spent the money. Now that only happened once. But there was another technical funny thing. When I was in Panama, I was assigned to a dispensary, not a hospital, like a clinic, if you will. And in the laboratory at that time, we had a test called a bacterial test, where you take a swab of an area, a mouth, arm, a sore, whatever, and you spread it on a plate. This plate was called a petri dish with agar gel in. And in determining certain types of bacteria, there were certain media that you had to add to this gel to make them grow better. And one of it was called something called, now you guys wouldn't know this, but it's still today called chocolate agar, because it's a brown colored medium. And the way we did that then, we had to make our own agar. So we had the dried powder, we would mix it with water, put it in a sterilizer, pour it into the sterile plates, let it solidify, and now it had a clear, pale yellow to it. We also had to make the chocolate agar, because certain bacteria will only grow in that chocolate agar. And we would get it from the States. And by the time we got it, it would be dried up and shriveled. We couldn't use it, so we had to make our own. We made chocolate agar using sheep's blood. Not dead sheep, but sheep. They would take blood from the sheep in the States, prepare it in bottles, and send it overseas. And it was supposed to come refrigerated. Sometimes it didn't. You would mix it with that agar, and that's where the brown color would come from. There were times when we ran out of these agar plates, and we couldn't even make the agar. We tried to borrow some from the Public Health Service hospital that was down there at the time. Nobody could get it. So the Air Force had a veterinary clinic in Panama. So one of the clinic officers said, well, why don't we just get our own blood fresh and make our agar? Because it was really necessary to have. And they came up with and I still have the original memo. I don't know why I kept it, but I did, because it was very official. They had the veterinary service get a sheep. They built a pen, and they had the veterinary people take blood from the sheep, because there were two clinics. I was stationed at Albrook Air Force Base, which was gone. That was shared with another Air Force Base on the Pacific side of the canal zone, Howard Air Force Base. And we do have a veteran in Juniata County from Howard Air Force Base. And we do have a veteran from Albrook. And those two veterans have finally met. Me and another guy. Yes. And our paths could have crossed. That's another story altogether. That's really weird. You heard of that 6 degrees of separation? Yeah. It's true. So they built they set up the infrastructure for it, and we got the two bases had to share. The two clinics had to share. They each got a bottle every month, and we made our blood agar, and it worked out well. And then it stopped a year later, and we tried to find out why it stopped. And then one of the officers sheepishly came in and told us why we had to go back to get the blood from the States. He said they bled the sheep to death.
Oh my gosh.
You didn't need a lot of blood, okay, but it never occurred to anybody that two bases were, and the sheep died. Now, okay, that was funny, but it wasn't funny, because it was, on hindsight, which is always 20/20, it was a dumb thing to do. It really was a dumb thing to do, because it fulfilled a need, but they couldn't sustain it. But that was a unique situation, again, where you have a problem and you need to resolve it and solve it. And when you have that problem with budget, you buy toilet paper. When you have a blood agar problem, you buy the sheep and bleed the sheep.
So what would you describe as the best part of your service experience? Is it the people, what you did, where you were? Can you think of the best, if you have to tell someone the best part?
Yeah, it's not a unique individual type thing. My last 14 months in the service as that supervisor in that hospital, where I saw a lot of wounded, I was treated personally by the medical staff. Now, most of the medical staff were senior NCOs, high enlisted pay grades, officers, doctors, and nurses primarily. And they all were officers. They all had officer rank. They treated me, I remember being treated like a professional. I wasn't an airman. I wasn't a sergeant. I was the person in the lab. They always addressed me by my last name because I wore a name tag, which was perfectly fine, because normally I didn't wear rank, so they didn't know my rank. And I always addressed doctors and nurses as doctors and nurses in the hospital setting. Outside the hospital setting, it was by their rank. But in the hospital setting, it was okay, nurse, and what her name? Nurse Cratchit. No, I won't say that. But so there were some senior nurses who did require be addressed as rank, and that was fine, But they gave me a sense of direction for a career, and I didn't know it at the time because of the way I was treated. That was the good time. They were good people, and even the two doctors that were down in the canal zone with me. Oh, that's a funny story. It's a funny, sad story. If I could
Tell it.
digress a little bit.
Yeah.
When I went down to this clinic down in Panama, I had one immediate supervisor who was a staff sergeant. I was a sergeant. That's a lower rank. So the staff sergeant ran the lab. I worked the lab. That's the way it worked. Okay, he did some of the paperwork. I did all the laboratory tests, which is fine. The clinic itself was staffed by two physicians, both young men, both Air Force captains, and that's as far as it went. Both of them were actually for the enlisted folks, our immediate OICs, and other officers in charge. They're the ones we reported to outside the enlisted rank. But these guys were guys, these were doctors, okay? And they saw patients, and they really were good doctors. But, and here's the but. Do you remember a movie called The Odd Couple?
Yes.
Okay? One was Felix Unger, one was Oscar Madison. Felix Unger, prim, straight, clean, shaven, etc. Oscar, well, he wasn't much so. That's with these two guys. The one doctor, his brass was always shine, his uniform was always pressed. He wore a stethoscope, they all did, over their necks. I remember that, and that's a common thing. And they each saw patients. Oscar Madison guy, well, he was lucky he wore his brass. Sometimes he didn't have brass on, so if you were to look at him, you wouldn't know. When instead of wearing your blue military belt on your pants, he had a leather belt sometimes. Most of the time, the top button on his tan uniform was always unbuttoned. He could never keep that button. And he also had a cigar. When he wasn't seeing patients, that cigar was in his mouth. Well, fast forward to after I retired, 2013, I tried to contact both of these doctors. I don't even know if they're still alive. I find one is living, or at least I thought was living in Arizona, the other one was down in Missouri. The Felix Unger guy, who I remember with 20-year-old eyes, I mean, he's not the same person, obviously, neither am I today. I see he has a clinic in Phoenix. I send a handwritten letter, just 2 paragraphs. 6 months later, I get a call from him. He had retired, and the clinic forgot to send him his mail, but that's okay. He did not remember me, but he did remember some of the things we did. So we had a couple of good conversations. I was able to make contact with him. He's a retired physician. He's 70, I think he's 77 years old now. He was about 4 years older than me. He's 78. The other doctor, I did track down his clinic, and I wrote the letter there, but I never got a response back. And I thought, well, I'll keep trying. It wasn't until last year, Google is your friend on the computer, if you know what you're looking for. I found his obituary. He had died in 2013, at the time I was trying to find him. That was the Oscar Madison of the group. I then contacted the Felix Unger doctor and told him about it. He didn't know. He didn't know. But those were the only two contacts that I made of people from my service time. We didn't have much time to make for a long time, I should say a long time, 12 to 18 months at a setting. And the people you meet are already there, and they're going to be rotating out shortly. And then there's new people going to rotate in, and then you're going to leave. So you really, you know,
Transition.
it really did. And those that went to Vietnam, unless they stayed for more than one tour, they had other things on their mind. They were trying to stay alive. And you know, that's a whole different ball of wax. And it wasn't, that's another side on that. This thing called PTSD, it's not just for military. I mean, some of the first responders are exposed to this too, but it is a real thing. And it's a real thing that needs to be addressed and is being addressed as far as I can tell. But it was 2 years ago, we did a parade in Juniata County, and we were walking along among some of the people there. Hutch was with me, and Hutch, this was caught me off guard. Hutch is a Vietnam vet. And we were talking to this young, I say young because he was younger than me by a couple of years, but a Vietnam vet who had been in country. And we shook hands, and I didn't think anything of it. And then I said, well, we sure could use it in the council doing funerals. That set him off. And he sort of went nuts is what happened, in my estimation. He ran off to where we were standing and yelling some things about it being a baby killer, for crying out loud. And I couldn't understand that. Jumped into his car. Now this is in the summertime with the windows up and the car off, okay? Just so he didn't want to come out. And I said to Hutch, what did I do? And he told me that it was, this guy had PTSD, and that was probably just the fact that he heard that and knew that you were a medic or something like that that set him off. I didn't know that. That's the first time I had contact with that. When I was in the service with some of those patients I talked about, there were people there, guys, I didn't see any women, but I saw guys, that patients that were awake but wouldn't stare at you, wouldn't look at you. They wouldn't talk to you. I didn't know what that was. I was told by physicians, don't worry, that's shell shock. They'll get over that. No. Shell shock happened for real. It was for real. That was PTSD as we know it today. So that was an eye-opener for me, and it is real.
Okay. So, tell us about when your service ended. Is it an abrupt thing where they say goodbye and off you go?
No. In my case, it was different. Because of my rank and because of my skill level, and because they still needed medical people in the hospital laboratory, they offered me a re-enlistment and re-enlistment bonus. And of course, this was all not on paper, this was just verbal. And a base of choice, or stay right where I was. But I would have to re-enlist for another 4 years. My overall military time was a mixture of the good, the bad, and the ugly. But a lot of it was good. A lot of it, the bad and the ugly, I had no control over it. It wasn't me, it was my surroundings, okay? And I remember thinking, you know, I really would like to go on with another part of my life. I had a 6-year commitment, 4 years active duty, 2 years inactive duty. So if I left, which I did, I still had 2 years on reserve. And it wasn't until 2 years later that I got my certificate that says I'm now fully discharged from the military. But I said, I remember saying something to the effect that it's not a bad life, it's just not my life. And I didn't have anybody to go home to other than family. I didn't have any girlfriends at home or anything like that. I mean, all all my contacts in my world were those 4 years. That changed 3 months after I got back, when I left. But it was a good time overall. I learned a lot. They treated me as a professional. I don't regret it. I got my eyes open to war and the effects of war. I also saw a thing that I didn't know. It's not friendship, it's camaraderie. I didn't know what that word meant, literally, when I heard it the first time. But it's what I have right now with these guys my age doing these funerals. It's a camaraderie that all came from that. It all came from that military time. So I would say it was a good time, totally. And it was not abrupt. It was a decision that you could make, and I made the decision. And it was another chapter. It wasn't until 30, 40 years later that I reopened that chapter. By that time, I couldn't remember very much.
So did you go back to Philadelphia then? Is that where you returned? Or?
No, I was living in New Jersey at the time.
In New Jersey?
Yeah,
Okay.
I did. I left the military in, I think it was March of 1970. Went home, and I was staying at the house. I was getting ready to move out, but I wanted to just get all my stuff together. And that's when I started working at that hospital, and that's when I met my to-be wife at that
Your
time.
wife. Okay.
And before 1971, I was married, and we were having a baby, and she's now 48 years old. What can I say?
Mm-hmm.
But that was, like I said, I looked at it as a different chapter of my life. But I remember when I got the 2-year commitment, inactive duty commitment, completed. They sent me a certificate, and I remember Sharon saying, "Hey, this is from the Air Force. How long you been out?" I said, "Oh, 2 years. You know that." And because it was in '72, and she said, "Well, they want you back." No, I looked at it and said, "No, I completed my commitment time. They don't want me back. Nobody wants me back." Well, she was kind of nervous because she didn't know what it was, and we had a baby, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Steve, before we move into a few reflections and some conclusions, tell us about your hat.
Oh. My hat is my military history. On the back of my hat, I have Travis Air Force Base, 1966, but actually it was 1970, 66 and 70,
Okay.
United States Air Force. So there's branch of service and where I was stationed primarily. On the front of the hat, American flag, my rank at the time I was discharged, my occupation badge, medical laboratory. This is a Vietnam War pin that was just recently given out to Vietnam War veterans, not necessarily Vietnam veterans. And this is the patch of the 60th Medical Group. The 60th Medical Group, a little bit of history on that one. In 1966, after I got out of basic training, they sent me to Travis Air Force Base. First time. I went to a hospital. That hospital, that was July of 1966. 1 July 1966, the medical group was formed. I didn't know that. Yeah, the 60th Medical Group. Today on Facebook, the 60th Medical Group is there. So I told them a little story. I sent them a little story about it because I was one of the first members of that 60th Medical Group. And the first thing they said was, "Wow, that's really great. Got any pictures?" No. I got memories. I don't have pictures. But that's where I finished out my military career, at Travis. I started it there and I finished it there. And it was that hospital has been decommissioned. It was decommissioned in 1988. I didn't know that. And they built a whole new, they call it a campus now. It's a aeromedical school. It literally is what it is. It's aerospace medicine. It's still the same 60th Medical Group, But it's now changed, so. And the hospital, it went through a couple of iterations, the original hospital. It's still a building, but I think it's now used for office space for, but I looked at it on Google Earth, and I looked at the building, because I haven't been to Travis in years. And I looked at that building, and I was telling my wife, see that? That's the front entrance. See, we go in there, we go to the left, we go down the hallway there, there's the reception area, there was hematology, there was chemistry. She said, what are you talking about? I said, that's where I worked. So I remembered it, and I did. That was one of the few, but it's not used that way anymore. It's just an office building, so. I'm never gonna be visiting back there, so it's.
Okay. So tell us, what message would you like to leave for the future generations who will view or hear this interview?
From my perspective, it was a time of change, big change. It was a time of being, well, when you have sudden change, it can be kind of scary. Okay, and I use that word loosely because you really weren't afraid, you were just afraid of the unknown in that respect. It changed my life. It changed my life for the good. Did it change the life of everyone that I was with for the good? No. But I wasn't looking at others, I was looking at me. I wanted to initially survive the introduction to the military. I did. It was tough, tougher than I thought. But then it changed when I became a member of the medical service. The medical service gave me a career. They gave me the foundation for a career. I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was going to have it, but I thought it would be in a hospital setting. As it turned out, it wasn't. Being in the military can give you a basis for that type of thing. I say can because it's not a guarantee, but it is what you make it. The people that I worked with and the members of the military were just good people. Just good people. Yeah, you had your rocky road with, personnel and that sort of thing. But as I recall it, it was just a good time. It was kind of, I think, even better than high school. Because in high school there were too many cliques. In the military there are no cliques. Okay, you earn what you got and you're treated as such. And that is the way it is today too. Although it's a lot different today. For future, when I went into the Air Force, I only had those three choices. And I decided to enlist. First of all, I wasn't even sure they were going to accept me, but they did. Those that go into the military today, there is no draft. They don't have to do it. They do it for their own personal reasons, whatever those reasons might be. But they don't have to. They choose to. And because they choose to, that doesn't make them any less or any better or any less than people like me when we went in. We had a job to do, we did it. In my case, there was a war going on, but I was lucky. And I was lucky because I didn't go to Vietnam. I didn't get into that war zone. And I think of people who did. Do I remember anybody that, well, let me back up a little bit. When I came to Juniata County, after I joined the council, I started looking at some of those people that died, young men that died, and didn't get a chance to see a family, didn't get a chance to see the rest of the world, didn't get a chance to be where I am right now. And that hit home. And it hit home when you do research in something like that, even back as far as, in my case, World War I. When I did some research from World War I, World War II, Korea, the forgotten war, and Vietnam, the war nobody wanted. Those times, for me, were okay, except, if I may give one little story real quick.
Sure.
When I left Panama to go back to Travis, I got called into the NCOIC. That's the chief enlisted person in the lab, the supervisor. And he was giving me an introduction. It wasn't the same person that was there when I was there before. And he said, okay, I'll give you a walkthrough of the lab and the hospital so you can get yourself familiar with some of the things that are in here. I said, that's okay, Chief, I don't need to do that. I was here 18 months ago. And he said, oh, that's good, that you don't have to do anything as far, you know where everything is? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, okay, I got one piece of advice for you. Now, these are not the exact words, but this was the gist of what was going on. He did say, don't wear your uniform into town when you're on, when you go leave the base. And I said, well, Chief, I wasn't planning on doing that anyway. But he said, don't do it at all, period. You know, even if you're just going into town for something. Now, when I say town, we're talking Sacramento, not far from San Francisco. At that time was not a good place to be, even in Sacramento. Frankly, even in California, if you were off that base. He said, don't do it. I said, okay, I won't do it. I won't wear my uniform. But why? Why are you telling me this? And his words were, struck me kind of funny when I heard it, because I didn't believe it. And then I realized it was true. He said, I don't want to get a call at 4 o'clock in the morning to come haul your ass out of the hoosegow. I said, what are you talking about? You know, why would I be in jail? Because somebody will do something or say something to you, and you're going to haul up and get into a fight. Not me. He said, oh, yes, you will. And then he proceeded to tell me what these guys and gals were seeing that I didn't see. And then I did see it later on. But that was, I think Hutch might have even mentioned it to you.
He did.
And back to that 6 degrees of separation with Hutch. And I told you about the guy that's in Port Royal, okay, who was a guard. When Hutch went into the Air Force, he went in January of 1966, as he told me. I went in April of 66. Now, I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know there was a central Pennsylvania, so that's how bad it was. He goes off to missile silos in central United States. I go off to California and then Panama. He goes off to Vietnam. I'm in Travis Air Force Base Hospital in, I guess it was in July of 1969. I think Hutch got out, was discharged. He came back to the States sometime in late 69 to be discharged. Our paths, what are the odds of us being at that place at the same time with millions of men going through this whole thing? And neither one of us ever being in the same area. And then it happened twice with this guy in Port Royal, who happened to be pulling guard duty at the base of Albrook Base and said, you know what, I'll bet our paths crossed. Wow, I mean, that's just strange. But that's the way it was.
Okay. What do you wish more people knew about veterans?
Well, the most important thing is they're no different than you. They just experience different things, perhaps. Some of those experiences might have been, well, traumatic. And some of those experiences may not have been, well, boring, because you get that as well. Or they were good. You know, but they're the same experiences in different ways and different formats than most people. There's a lot of structure. If you're not used to structure, that can be a traumatic experience too. There's camaraderie. We seem to have lost that, a lot of that now, and that's a shame. There's this unspoken, it's really unspoken, but you can speak, we do speak it. I refer to some of these guys as brothers. They're not my brother. But the word entails and connotates that which is a lot closer a bond than anything else. One thing about the military, even today, whether you're 21 years old today going into the Marines, or in my time when you went in, when there was a draft, we all, every one of us, took the same oath. That oath, it doesn't have an expiration date on it, okay? there are some veterans who are, well, rather, I would say, uncouth. There are some veterans who are criminals. There are lots of veterans who are just veterans. They did their time, and that's all. But we all have one thing in common, is that oath. Not too many people can say that. That and that bonding that I mentioned. I think that's really what I want to convey. Veterans are no different than average person, other than maybe those few things. Does it separate us that way? No, not really. We all have our foibles. Some of us have families. We all go through the trials and tribulations of raising kids, and sometimes, or being discriminated against, which, as I recall, I never saw that. I never saw that. And I was in a mixed group of people all my 4 years. But that's another story, I guess, for another time. I don't recall ever seeing discrimination, or maybe I didn't recognize it. When you're an enlisted person, you're being discriminated against for everything. It doesn't matter. But you may not know it that way. Or that may be couched in because you're in that situation. I don't know. But today it's different. Today, I feel for these veterans coming back today that go out and fight a war they may not like, but they have no choice, but they're going to do it. And they're going to go in harm's way because that's what they're supposed to do. And if they come back, they're being treated, I think, better than some of those Vietnam veterans were treated. And I'm glad to see that that's changed. The healthcare system is getting a lot better. It has its problems, okay? But I think they're trying to change it now. People like the veteran service officers that are in the counties in Pennsylvania, I don't know them all. I only know a couple of them. Actually, just 3, come to think of it. But I also know some people from the Department of Veterans and Military Affairs in Pennsylvania, which is the national headquarters at Indiantown Gap. These are good people. These are people who, younger than me, of course, many of them, who served when they didn't have to. And I respect that. I respect that. I think that's it.
Okay. We have one last question for you.
Sure.
Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
The time I almost drowned?
There you go.
But that was a funny thing. That was funny.
Tell us.
When I got down to Panama, Central America, I'd been in the dispensary 3 months. And my NCO came up to me and said, "You got volunteered to go through the jungle survival school." Okay. What the hell is a jungle survival school? Later on, I learned that's where the astronauts went. All the astronauts up in the 60s all went through this jungle survival school in Panama. It was done by the Air Force at the time. I said, okay. And that was 2 weeks of really, really horrendous jungle. I hated jungle. I really hated the jungle. There was nothing in the jungle I liked. One of the things we had to do in the preparation for the jungle itself was we had 3 days of training prior to going into the jungle. And you were on your own at that point. And then when you're done, you're done. One of the things was, remember I said I didn't like the Navy because I didn't swim? Even then I didn't swim. Well, one of the things in the jungle survival school was, at that time, was parachute training. Now, we didn't jump out of airplanes, but what they did do is they put a parachute out in the middle of a lake, a shallow lake, okay? And it's saturated with water, but it's still floating. They wanted to show you a technique, so you had to walk out there, go underneath and come up in the middle of the parachute. Now, it's going to cling to you. Right away, you're going to panic. Well, they teach you how to come across the top, grabbing the silk and pulling it off. It forms an air pocket, and you just back up. Sounds easy, right? Not when it's the first time you do it. Second thing they did was, related to parachute was they put you in a harness, an actual parachute harness. And you had that harness on, and you also had to wear a Mae West. That was a life preserver, okay? And it had to be inflated. Oh, that's cool. I'll stay above the water. They hooked the harness up to a speedboat, okay? And they told you what was going to happen. You had your Mae West floating, so you were floating. Your feet weren't touching any bottom. You were in deep water. And they said, we're going to hook this rope to you, and we're going to pull it. And you're going to go down. Okay, and when you go down, and you will go down, even with a Mae West on, and it did, you just hit the release. It'll release, you'll come right to the top. That was the theory. Guess whose didn't open? Okay, and I asked ahead of time, well, what happens if it doesn't open? Typical military answer. It always opens. Well, what if it doesn't? Just put your hand up, we'll see and we'll stop. I believe that. Okay, and the uniform we were wearing were these jungle green fatigues. At those times they were like canvas. When they got wet, and heavy boots. When you went in, I mean you went in wearing those fatigues and the boots. Darn it, it started up, and they caught me off guard because I wasn't sure they were ready there because I didn't hear it. And right down I went. And I go like this. Doggone releases, and I try to put my hand up. My hand's going like this, right? Nobody's paying attention. It felt like an hour later, but actually it was only a couple of minutes. Yeah, they finally stopped. I come popping up. And nobody asked me if I was okay. They just, okay, let's get his butt out of the water. Now that was funny. Not at the time. That just reinforced that feeling that I had. I'm never getting in the water again. To this day, I do not go to the beach. I don't go in lakes. I just won't do it. Give me my granddaughter when she was young. She's now 18, but when she was 5, these kids, they swam like fish. I remember we were at some sort of a resort. Becca's in there, and she's got these floaty things on her arm. And this is really, I don't know why I'm saying this, but she's swimming around inside this little pool, and I walk over to her, and we're talking, and she said, "Papa, come on into the pool." I said, "No, Becca, I don't swim." She says, "I'll give you one of my floaties." And my response was, "Becca, your floaty is not 50 feet long and floats on the water. I'm not getting you." So that should end it, I think. And that was funny. I mean, although.
And you survived jungle school, though, right? I mean,
barely. Oh, when we got there, they put us in a helicopter. That was the first time I'd ever been in a helicopter. I was in several times after that, but when you've never been in a helicopter, they fly you out to the jungle. They land. You're out. There were 4 of us, as I recall, 4 of us. I didn't know these people. 3 others. I'm the guy with the medical background. Who did they give the survival rifle to? Me. What am I going to do with it, right? I don't shoot guns. Well, I did, but they land and they said, "You're on your own." And so we were. And when we got there, they said, "Now make sure when you start your fire that you keep the fire going, and you want to protect it because it might rain." And it did rain. Because without fire, you can't cook anything. Otherwise, if you find something, you're going to eat it raw. No, you're not. You're not going to eat anything. We had bug repellent. It was in little bottles, right? It had alcohol in it. So we poured it on the wood, all 4 of us. We got the fire going, barely, and had to keep it going. Now we got no bug repellent. What's in the jungle? Bugs. All kinds of bugs. I don't remember a lot of the specifics. I do remember, though, they dropped us a care package, a parachute. They flew over and dropped a parachute with some, what they call sea rations. And I never heard of a sea ration. But I remember tearing open the cabinet, and the cardboard box, and there was a green can in it. And I remember on the can was a key, and I didn't want whatever was in it because it had a key. I don't remember exactly what it was. But I saw one that had this thing attached to the top of it. It looked like I didn't know what it was. It was a can opener. I didn't know what it was at that time. But it was peanut butter and crackers. That's all I cared about, because I was so hungry I was going to eat anything. Dated 1952. Now this is in 1967. So they still had some of this stuff laying around. It was the best I ever had. To this day, I have that can opener. It's called a P38 can opener, and I still have that. I don't have much of my uniform or any memorabilia that I had with me. After I got out of the service and went home, Mom had a fire when after I moved out, and a lot of that stuff got burned up. But I have the P38. I have one collar medallion that's just peeling off, that's dated. I have my name tag, which is plastic. I don't know how it got through the fire. And my dog tags. And my memories. And they're not very good. But so long ago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have been great.
For sharing your story with us.
Not much of a story. There's one thing I can tell you about veterans in general. We all got stories. We all got stories.
Okay.
And some of those stories we won't tell. We won't talk about it. There were instances and occasions where, for me, where there were some things I just didn't want to remember. With patients especially. I didn't want to remember it. I still don't remember it, but I forced myself not to, because it was pretty gruesome. One was even, I was on morgue detail. Very rarely did it happen. They had a plane crash at a nearby Air Force base outside Travis, and they called the morgue detail from us. And we went out to the crash site. There was nothing to pick up. There was nothing there. And you couldn't identify anything. And luckily I didn't have to. But because the hospital has a pathology department, you had to try to get as many samples as you could for identification. That was not pleasant. I tried not to remember that one. Are we complete?
I think we are. Shall I turn the camera off?
It's up to you guys, whatever you want to do.